On March 20th, 2023, Raila Odinga, leader of Kenya's opposition party Azimio, called for a public demonstration to protest the increasing cost of living that has recently characterized the country's economy. Odinga vowed to continue mobilizing protests nationwide until the people's demands were met. True to his word, the movement dubbed mandamano, meaning protest in Swahili, lasted for 2 weeks, culminating in 3 days of protests across the country. The protests have since resumed in July, with counties across Kenya taking to the streets for days at a time. Military-grade policing was deployed in response to the protests, with blockades across Nairobi and other counties, protesters tear-gassed, journalists attacked by government forces and protesters alike, with a number of people killed in the violence, both by police and by unknown persons and groups. Much public commentary has described the protests as largely peaceful except for the police violence and violence amongst protesters that erupted in response to police presence and/or agitation. The cost of living is a serious crisis in Kenya. Beyond Raila's mass mobilization efforts, what are the realities of this economic crisis and how is it impacting everyday Kenyans? In what recently elected President William Ruto calls a bottom-up approach to rebuilding Kenya's debt-riddled economy, the new administration has been removing a variety of government subsidies. The 15% taxpayer electricity subsidy that has been protested by Kenya Power and the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, was cut on the 31st of December 2022. This, coupled with higher costs of transporting goods due to the cut of the remaining subsidies on diesel and kerosene in December after an initial cut in September, has meant that manufacturers have had to increase the cost of overall goods to account for the double hit in the increase of production costs. School subsidies that were saving families between 6,000 to 8,000 Kenyan shillings a semester were also cut, and subsidies on maize were also cut in September 2022, creating a crisis felt from home to home across the country. According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics Customer Price Index, it showed a dramatic increase of the cost of basic goods between January and February 2023. The price of carrots, cabbage and kale rose a staggering 11% between January and February, tomatoes a staggering 7.8%, packed milk 2%, and cooking gas 4.7%, all within the same period of January and February 2023. The government will eliminate the remaining unsustainable and consumption-driven fuel subsidy by the end of December 2022, but will continue to offer support to agricultural production through the fertilizer subsidy program, said the Treasury in the 2022 budget review. Though farmers are still feeling the weight of the cost of fertilizer due to the compounding impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war. In March 2022, Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Peter Munya expressed fears that the war could cause the price of fertilizer to increase for farmers. We get most of our fertilizer from Russia and China, and this war may see the price of fertilizer hit 7,000 shillings if there will be no subsidy in place, said Peter Munya in an address to Parliament in March 2022. The impacts of the cost of living crisis are seeing many families go without being able to meet their basic needs for days on end. According to a report by BBC, a mother who was able to buy half a kilo of rice for 50 shillings to feed her family is no longer able to afford it due to the inflated price. Her alternative is maize flour, used to make the staple food ugali. She tells BBC that, quote, "I used to buy the cheapest flour at 85 shillings. Right now, flour is 150 shillings. When I'm not able to make money, we sleep hungry." So where does mandamano fit into this landscape of Kenya's surging cost of living crisis? Raila Odinga, the key voice mobilizing the mandamano protests, is a veteran Kenyan politician, having served as Prime Minister from 2008 to 2013 and the MP for Langata from 1992 until 2013. The Kibra informal settlement, located in Langata constituency and sometimes called the Kibera slums, is the largest informal settlement on the African continent and the third largest in the world. Kibera, like other informal settlements in Kenya and across Africa and the global south, suffers from abject, systematic poverty and is often only a thought for political elite when it comes around to mobilizing numbers for election seasons. Interestingly, in the midst of the mandamano discourse, Raila made a comment suggesting that he would settle in Kibera after he has retired. In the 20-plus years that Raila has represented the informal settlements in Parliament, noteworthy political or policy work addressing the dire and unjust conditions in Kibera can be accredited to Raila Odinga. Ruto's retraction of government subsidies on basic goods and services and the impact this has had on everyday people is undeniably unjust. But Raila's positioning of himself as the people's vanguard is not a genuine depiction of his positionality in Kenya's political landscape, especially when it comes to the current economic crisis. Though the organizers of Mandamano may live daily lives far out of reach of the impacts of the cost of living crisis that Kenya is grappling with, and though it could be very well argued that the crisis being a rallying cry by the political opposition is to do no more than even out what is being considered an unfair political score, we cannot lose sight of the fact that people flooded the streets of Nairobi and beyond for days on end, facing injury and even the loss of life because of the unbearable effects the rising cost of living is having on the country's working class and poor communities.